All right, so we'll get started.
All right.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another Backyard Wildlife with T-Town. It's part of our webinar series. The series is now going to run through the spring every month. So once a month on the second Wednesday of the month, same time, 7 p.m. Next month, we will be talking about vernal pools and their ecological purpose and the inhabitants of them. So please join us next month for vernal pools. But today we have a very exciting speaker. We have Wendy Bosco, and she is, as I pull up her bio, a research and graduate student with the University of Miami, where she's pursuing a master's in biology with cooperation with the Wildlife Conservation Society through Project Dragonfly. Her current research focuses on local bat species, evaluating and creating bat habitats, including bat boxes, and fostering community awareness through bat conservation education. Wendy holds a BS in biology from the University of Buffalo and a master's in science in secondary science education from the University of Bridgeport. And she's living here in White Plains, New York. So I'd like to welcome Wendy and hand it over to her, and she's going to take it away and talk to us all about bats. If you have any questions during this webinar, please put them in the chat and we'll get to them during the Q&A later on.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much for the intro, Alyssa. And if I'm looking this way, it's because I have the chat open on this screen as well. So I'll try not to be too focused on that and just keep my eyes on you guys. But again, I'm Wendy Bosco, as Alyssa just said. So it's nice to be here speaking with you guys about bats. So you already know who I am, but what will we be discussing? We are going to talk generally about all bats. Then we'll kind of hone in on bats and diseases, focus on our main topic, which is Westchester's bats, and then end up by talking about some struggles and solutions that bats have going on for them right now. All right. Oh, that's a cute sound. So overview of bats. Absolute basics, bats are mammals. So what that means is they're warm-blooded. They give birth to live young, which are called pups. Their pups do nurse, they drink milk. You can see can you guys see my mouse, by the way? Yes? Mouse or no? I'm gonna guess yes. Oh, thank you, Kent. All right, so as you see right here, this is actually a mother with her pup. This is a flying fox. Here's another flying fox right there. A bunch of different types of species. We'll get into those in a minute. They do have fur or hair, and this is the only mammal species that flies. There are things like gliders, but gliding is not the same as true flight. Bats are globally dispersed. They're found on every continent except Antarctica. There's over 1,400 species, which most people don't realize. It's an extremely diverse taxa, which is great. And proportionately for their size, bats are really, really long-lived. It's common to have bat species that live over 10 years. And the oldest bat, I believe, is 31 or 34. 34 might be the new record breaker, if I recall. But when you think about something that's proportionately the same size like a mouse, they live for just a few years. So bats, very long lives, and they come in a huge range of sizes. The biggest bats out there can be about 6-foot wingspans, so 2 meters. Okay, those are typically the flying foxes. Those are almost all fruit bats. The insect-eating bats don't get that big. And then you have the tiny, tiny little bats over here, like the bumblebee bat, which is also called the Kitti's hog-nosed bat. All 3 of these bat species that are on this slide live in Southeast Asia. So let's just take another quick look at some bats. Now, if you're picturing a normal Halloween-style bat in your mind, just look carefully at these faces, because when we say that bats are diverse, oh man, these are just a few of the highlights. So we've got over here the wrinkle-faced bat. You're going to notice their names are really, really appropriate and not terribly creative, but hey. So these guys are South and Central America. Yellow-winged bats with these huge ears and big nose structures. A personal favorite because they're adorable white tent-making bats. Those are Central American. European brown long-eared bats, little free-tailed, and then my also personal favorites just because they look so menacing, but also very pretty, the Eastern tube-nosed bat. And if you really look closely, you can actually see their nose. Each nostril is a tube. So Why do they have all of these different structures? We'll get to that in a minute. First, we got to know what they eat. So as soon as I started learning about bats, I started getting a lot of questions about vampire bats. A lot of people are, I found, under the impression that most bat species eat blood. And actually, if you look at this infographic from the PA Bat Rescue, the vast majority of bat species globally are actually insect eaters, so bug eaters. If you look, again, this is just a representation. These aren't actual numbers. You know, it's not one bat per species because 1,400 little tiny icons would be painful. The next largest majority is the frugivores, those are the fruit-eating bats. Then you've got nectar or pollen eaters, meat eaters, so eating things like small animals, frogs, birds, fish eaters are next. And then only 3 species are actual vampire bats. And those are typically in Central and South America. And what those bats really normally do is not the vampire thing, but they'll actually find an open wound and lap blood up from it. Although they do have the ability to just give little nicks and lap blood from them too. So that's what bats eat. So in order to do that eating, this is why bats have such insane structures on their heads and faces. So any bat that hunts using echolocation is going to typically do that using their voice boxes. Some of them do also use tongue clicks, but that's very few species. Most use their larynx like we have, but they kind of manipulate it in a different way and have slightly different tubing. So that'll lets them produce their ultrasonic frequencies that bounce off of objects, including prey. And they can hunt like this guy right here. So just jumping back for a moment, if we look at these specialized structures, really great examples right here. Their ears are often adapted to collect back those sound waves, and some of them have facial adaptations, and those are the creepiest looking ones. So if you look at the wrinkle face, that's why he's got the wrinkle face. It actually helps funnel the sound waves that are coming back at him to help process everything around him that he can't see with his eyes necessarily. Although bats do have decent eyesight. Blind as a bat is not a real thing. All right, so moving forward, a little bit more about bat anatomy. When you look, this is just a kind of fun look at the fact that bats' wings are actually their jazz hands. So CVS was kind enough to sell me this clearance bat skeleton, but you can really see the wings of bats, okay? They're not like insect wings, they're not like bird wings. They're actually just like human hands. So if you look at the human arm, we have our humerus, radius ulna, down into our carpals and phalanges. Same thing with cats, whales, and yes, bats. Fun fact, there's a little tiny appendage that kind of sticks out on the end of a bat wing. It looks like that's where the elbow is. That's actually their thumb. So if you ever see that on a bat, they're giving you a thumbs up, which is adorable. All right, other identifying features, again, tend to be the crazy noses that they can have, the different ear structures they can have. They actually do have different types of tails, and they do even have different wing types. But. All right, what is the ecological importance of bats? So because so many are fruit and nectar eaters, they're really important pollinators and seed dispersers worldwide. They also have really powerful fertilizers. Their poop, guano, is an extremely potent fertilizer, and a lot of people actually, especially in Southeast Asia, will harvest the guano and sell it. They're also amazing insect regulators. It's estimated, this is a very massive range, but it's estimated that between $4 and $50 billion is saved annually by US farmers just because of the pesticides that they don't have to put down because of the number of pests that bats actually eat here in America. So go bats, food would be more expensive without them. And their least favorite role, they are very good at being prey. So, all right, next up, bats and disease. This is another really hot topic for bats right now. Yes, bats do carry diseases. I love them. I wish I could lie to you, but it's true. Bats are very good at hosting diseases. And this is actually because of their immune systems. So bats have one of the most impressive immune systems in the mammal kingdom for sure, and debatably in the entire animal kingdom. And that has to do with the evolution of flight and how it kind of agitates their entire bodies. So being mammals that fly, they had to have these immune systems that basically de-escalate inflammation and underreact. And most of the diseases like the SARS-CoV-2 diseases actually have worse impacts because the immune system is having such an intense reaction. So bats can be hosts to diseases that other mammals are made sick by. So way to be too good at your job, bats. But luckily, transmission risks can be reduced if you don't do things like lick the walls of caves or handle bats raw in meat markets. So we'll talk about that more in a second. First, let's talk about rabies. That's a little bit more of a problem here for our American bats. Another thing that came up when I started learning about bats and being a bat biologist was a lot of people think that most bats have rabies. So for safety, you have to operate under the assumption that if you find a bat in your house and it bites you, it might be rabid. That's just being cautious. But when you look at the actual numbers of reported bats, the percentage of bats with rabies from those being sent in and tested is actually really, really low. It's maintained below 5% since the 60s. We also have to remember that other species are also rabies vectors. So this is from the CDC. And if you can see here again, since the 60s, things like raccoons and skunks and foxes are also rabies problems. So anyone that wants to just badmouth bats, there's a lot of rabies problems out there. But again, if you find a bat in your home and it bites you, you do need to send it in for testing and you do need to go to the doctor. So even though the percentage is low, let me just put that public service announcement out there. All right, another very hot issue, COVID, right? So this is another thing I would really love to be able to lie to you about. Yes, bats are hosts, again, of those SARS-CoV-2 viruses, including COVID. So did COVID potentially originate in bats? Scientists suspect yes. Okay, so you can't blame them though. It's really not a bat's fault. And again, if you just stay out of bat habitats or use extra caution if you do have to handle bats, you will not get COVID from bats. So don't think that when you're seeing a bat fly under the night sky, you're going to get COVID from it. You actually have to be in pretty close proximity to the aerosol that they give off or their feces. So really, unless you're in caves or handling them directly, you're in pretty good shape. This can become an issue if you're in, for example, an attic that has had a big bat population for a while and you're kicking around in the guano. You should wear a mask, a good mask. But other than that, if you're out in the field and there's bats around you, you're really not in high risk. I was actually in a bat conference today, and they are testing, different researchers are testing bats for COVID. So they're finding very, very promising numbers in terms of bats here in America that actually have COVID. It's pretty darn stinking low. By COVID, I mean the SARS-CoV-2 family viruses. But again, just don't handle bats. Okay. Now, those were all zoonotic diseases, rabies, COVID, other SARS-CoV-2 family viruses. But there are diseases that we can't get as people that do kind of torment bats. One of them is white nose syndrome. White nose syndrome, bats not good at staying away from. They're very susceptible. This is actually caused by a fungus that was first found in a New York mine around 2006. And what it does is, you can see in this picture, look at this poor little guy. His face is kind of crusted over. So this fungus crusts over their faces and it's really itchy and it starts to attack their wing membranes and kind of eat at their skin. And if you can imagine having a fungus over your face and skin, you would wake up and itch in the middle of the night, right? So this is why this can kill bats, because typically this fungus likes cold temperatures, which is odd, but hibernating bats are perfect targets for this fungus. So hibernating bats get this itchy infection, and what they'll do is they'll wake up from hibernation, kind of like scratch themselves and fuss, try to groom themselves, and then fall back to sleep. They keep doing that throughout the winter. The whole point of hibernation is to save energy. If you think about waking up in the night, if you've ever had really bad poison ivy, if you wake up throughout the night, how do you feel the next day? Pretty crappy, right? Same thing with bats, except multiply that by the entire span of their hibernation. So by the time bats come around to spring, they've gotten so basically exhausted and depleted their fat reserves that they really can't wake up and go forage. So they starve to death. So white nose sucks. by 2011, which I know is a while ago, but this was the last really comprehensive survey done, the death toll was already between 5.7 and 6.7 million bats. In certain populations, so like certain caves, the populations were decimated by over 90%, some of them as high as 98%. Okay, so it's particularly harmful to Myotis species. We'll talk about which ones those are in a minute. But the northern long-eared, little browns, tricoloreds are all threatened or endangered now because of white nose syndrome. So, looking at the spread of white nose, again, there's our first detected cave. This is actually a European fungus, and it's suspected that it was brought over here by cave hikers. Got it on their clothing or their shoes, brought it over. European bats have evolved over a very long time to live with white nose syndrome, but American bats aren't evolved in the same way. So this fungus just went by storm. You can see from this graphic, started off in the purple in 2006, and it has stayed in all the infected areas, but then it's spread across the country. Now it's even being found as far west as Portland. So if you want to know more about white nose, I could do a whole presentation on that, or you could go to this website and learn more. It's really sad. There are a lot of things being done to try to help bats with white nose. One of them is hybridizing with European bats, looking for some kind of antifungal, but nothing has been kind of a fix-it yet. So fingers crossed for the bats. All right, so what bats live in New York? The reason we're all here today. Of those 1,400 species, we have 9. So the 9 species of bats in New York pretty much break into 2 main categories. You got your tree bats and your cave bats. Now the cave bats during the spring and summer will sleep in trees, but it's all about hibernation. So the tree bats will actually migrate. So your hoary bats, your red bats, and your silverhairs are New York's migratory bat species. And then all these cave bats will hibernate in caves. All right, let's look at each one because they're actually adorable. Little brown bats, look at that face. Look at the little snout. It's actually one of the hallmarks of the species is the little snout. All right, so they do winter in cave and mines. They actually can winter in these huge colonies. The largest one in New York was about 200,000 bats. So this is part of the reason that little browns were so hit by white nose syndrome is because they get together in the snooze. So one bat gets it, spreads like wildfire. So now this is actually an endangered species. You can see their range. All the range maps, by the way, are from the IUCN Red List's website. So thank you to the IUCN Red List for the maps. So these guys are endangered. They used to be extremely common, like find them in your shoe common. All right, speaking of shoes, Eastern small-footed bats. Adorable name for a good reason. If you look down here, they actually have proportionately really small feet, which is cute, but probably not helpful to them because the feet are really important for clinging onto their roosting sites. Their range tends to be more in the east, hence Eastern small-footed. And again, these guys are endangered because of white nose syndrome. There's actually a massive effort going on to build large rock structures in Pennsylvania for these guys to hibernate and also just generally roost in because small-footed bats love rocks more than most species that are found in New York. So that's a fun Google if you want to find out what Pennsylvania is doing to save the Eastern small-footed bat. Oh, by the way, their scientific names, when I say Myotis, because I think I mentioned that before, Myotis species, Myotis lucifugus, Myotis labi, Myotis odalis. Here's another one, the Indiana bat. They all kind of look similar. We don't have any of the huge fruit bats like Southeast Asia or the terrifying ones like South America with the wrinkled face. Unless you like the wrinkled face, in which case, that's great, somebody has to. These guys are near threatened. They actually used to be endangered, but there's been really intense efforts to protect their hibernation sites. That's that word hibernacula, so they're caves. The reason these guys needed cave protection, they really like particular types of caves. These guys like cold limestone caves with standing groundwater. Thank you very much. And those types of caves tend to have really neat structures growing in them, which means that they're really great for tourism or just hikers. So that's part of the reason that this population in the 20th century took a nosedive, but a lot of those caves have been protected, so they're recovering. And they were first discovered in Indiana, hence the name, but they're actually found there. You can see that range. All right, we're about halfway through the bats. So, and you've got the northern bat. This is also for really good reasons. Again, bats are not very creatively named. This is the northern long-eared bat. Look at the long ears. They do have those kind of rounded tips. So not pointy tips. A lot of bats do have pointy tipped ears. All just little things that you can look for if you find yourself investigating bats. Fun fact with these guys, they have particularly high frequencies, and they do prefer to forage in denser forests than a lot of bats. And that high frequency might have something to do with their ability to do so. These guys are listed as near threatened. Again, they're a Myotis species, and the Myotis species were hit by white nose syndrome. If you look at their range, they're actually found all the way up into Western Canada. Oh, Sarah, I will be answering your question later. Oh, so many great questions. Sorry, gotta focus. Questions later. They're great though, keep them coming. All right, then we've got the tricolor bat. This is a Perimyotis subflavus, so it's not actually a Myotis bat. Their range tends to be eastern and central New York. Okay, these guys roost in particularly low numbers. That might be one of the things that's actually kind of helped keep them from spreading white nose so terribly in their populations. Another fun fact about these guys, they used to be categorized as a pipistrelle, which is a whole category of bats. But genetic information has helped tease them out, and now they are no longer called pipistrelles, they are tricolors. But you will see if you do any research on tricolor bats that they're often still called eastern pipistrelles. These guys are vulnerable, but not near, vulnerable, which is higher than near threatened, but lower than endangered. We'll have a graphic for that later. Big browns. So I actually have a juvenile big brown bat here in a box. So this guy, I don't know if you can see him very well. Big brown bat. Oh. No, not great being able to view. All right, so this guy is particularly mummified, but this juvenile big brown bat, along with 5 others that were sent in for testing, were found at a local preserve, the Ridge Road Park in Hartsdale. So there's a really big population of big brown bats over there. But unfortunately, the juveniles are not doing too well. There is suspected bacterial infection going on that's impacting young big brown bats and kind of like attacking their joints and making it so they don't survive to adulthood. So that's really, really new research. And I can't even cite a paper on it because the papers are also being written right now, which is kind of terrible and exciting at the same time. Hopefully it's nothing like white nose, but we'll see. As of right now, these guys are still of least concern. Another little interesting thing about these bats, most bats in New York mate in the fall, but these guys actually mate in the winter. So what females will do, they'll mate in the fall for most species, and they'll actually store the sperm. And then when they wake up, they fertilize themselves with the stored sperm. So just kind of an interesting bat trick. All right, then you have the hoary bat. This is another bat that's been recently recategorized based on genetic data. So it used to be called the Lazurius cinereus. Now it is the Aerorestes cinereus, so a whole different category. These are a migratory species. Right now they're of least concern, which is great, and partially because they don't get hit by white nose because they're migrating away instead of sleeping in a cave. But one of the things that they do have that's not great for them is they suffer from windmill deaths, or wind turbines, to use the technical term. They don't fly into them because, again, they're not blind as a bat and they do use echolocation. But what actually happens is as they are flying near any rotating wind turbine blades, within a huge range around the blades, there's actually a barometric drop. So they're flying along and they basically hit this invisible low pressure zone, and it causes them to bleed into their lungs and die. So it's not funny, it's sad. But that is one of the reasons that extra research is required to find out, what can we do in terms of adjusting the rotations. I know, right? Poor bats. It's a terrible way to die. You think you avoided the blade and then the barometric pocket and you're done. So they find them littering the ground under these turbines. And I am all for wind turbines. Wind energy is great, but there's a lot of lobbying going on right now to look for ways to modify wind turbines or turn them off during peak migration so that you don't just slaughter massive amounts of bats. Okay. Last but not least, for our New York species, this little guy. He's kind of ugly, but you kind of love him. You know, it's like that scrappy dog at the pound. Look at that face. Look at that ear. Very round and wide and stubby, hallmark of the silver-haired bat. Additionally, these guys have the blackest fur, and then they have these kind of silver guard hairs. So they're pretty easy to identify. They're super common in the Adirondacks. You can see their range is across the US up into Western Canada. All right. And they are of least concern, so hang in there, silver-haired. Oh wait, there is one more. I saved the prettiest for last for you guys. The Eastern red. Look at that face. I know. There's a really distinct boundary line for these guys. You would suspect that it would kind of hedge closer to the Rocky Mountains, but we're letting that go. Anyway, so with Eastern reds, their coat color is really helpful to them when they are hibernating. They actually do migrate out of New York into slightly warmer areas. So they don't look for caves to migrate to. They actually will migrate to slightly warmer states and then sleep in ground litter, meaning like leaf piles. So if you look, they're perfectly colored for sleeping in a forest below an oak tree. But you can imagine a big problem for these guys is if you rake your leaves a lot in the fall or use, you know, any kind of leaf blower and all those leaves get packed into the bags and the bags get shredded. So these guys are still of least concern, but if you find yourself living south of New York, just be careful when you rake up your leaves that you're not accidentally raking up some Eastern red bats. They are the cutest little thing. The PA Bat Rescue has one named Butterscotch. This is Butterscotch. He is not able to be returned to the wild, so they put up videos of this bat just snacking or snuggling in his blanket all the time. So if you ever want to kill a few minutes, go look up Butterscotch with the PA Bat Rescue. One other fun fact about these guys is that they can actually have about 3 or 4 pups, baby bats, which is uncommon for New York bats. Most New York bats have between 1 and 2. All right, bye Butterscotch, little sweetie. Okay, so we just looked at 9 New York bat species and I threw a bunch of information at you, but let's just process them for a second. So these are your bats, okay? This is their average wingspan in centimeters. Notice that we're starting at 20. So you've got your smallest would be the Eastern small-footed. Going to your largest would be the Hories with the big browns slightly behind them. These 3 species here, the Hories, the silvers, and the Eastern reds, migrate out of New York. And then if you look, what's interesting, the migratory species, least concern. And then the biggest of the New York species, the big brown, also of least concern. So when we're talking about white nose syndrome, it's little bats that don't migrate. So, and just for reference, by the way, the length, I am not the average male, so my hand is smaller than 19 centimeters, but the average male has a hand of about 19 centimeters long. So that would be just a bit smaller than a bat. So if you look at the bats I have here, this one is a pipistrelle, or sorry, this one is an Eastern small-footed, little tiny guy, and his wings are curled up. So keep that in mind that even though a lot of bats do have wingspans that are about the size of a ruler, that's when they're going like this. So typically they can actually squeeze into quite small spaces, which is why they can do things like get into attics. So squeeze up into these tiny little bats. Notice from far away, that would fit right in my hand. So this bat was found at the local park. That's the baby big brown. This guy is smaller than the baby big brown, right? And this guy was actually retrieved from our air conditioner a few years ago. It's a romantic gift to me from my husband. Poor dead bat. So also be careful when you're checking your air conditioners. All right, moving forward. Again, just a little quick recap to see those faces one more time. These are your New York neighbors. These are bats you would find in Westchester County. Just kind of neat to think of. Do you have a favorite? If you have a favorite, please type it in the chat because I'm dying to know what people think. Do you fall for the scrappy little silver-haired? Does the lustrous red hair of the eastern red get you every time? Tell me, I want to know. All right, so let's look a little bit more on what's going on in terms of where these bats have been detected in Westchester and how we know. All right, so you can monitor bats in a lot of different ways. There's mist netting, where you literally put up like a fine net and catch them, tag them, and say, oh, you're an eastern pipistrelle, or oh, you're a... So that's one way you can do it. You can also do collecting their guano and then doing genetic analysis, or you can do acoustic monitoring. So if you do acoustic monitoring, different bats have different call frequencies, which is super helpful because you can program software to identify these frequencies and then go out there with a microphone and record. So this is one of my favorite bat biologists, Nick Comparato. Nick has already begun monitoring bats in Westchester using acoustic software. And I've actually been lucky enough to help him with that recently. So we're working on collecting extra bat data. And this is what it looks like. This is Nick's actual data. We plug it into the software. You can see, you put up that microphone, there it is. Secure in that little box. You leave it out for about a week, depending on time of year and species. And then each of these little, they're called hockey stick sound waves, actually. Each of these little hockey sticks is an individual bat call. So the software would enable you to kind of pick through those, determine what frequencies match based on what you've programmed in, and then that would give you probabilities of what species exist where. And they're pretty on point. There have been surveys where mist netting helps confirm what the acoustic monitoring has suggested, and there's pretty high fidelity between the two, which is great. So if you're actually here in Westchester and you do frequent the parks, this is kind of neat to see. This is what Nick's data has shown us thus far. We have big browns in Cranberry Lake Preserve over here, Ward Pound Ridge up here, Edith G. Reed over here, Lenoir and Yonkers. In Ward Pound Ridge, there's also eastern small-footeds. You got little browns in, again, Cranberry, Ward, and Lenoir, and you got tricolors in Cranberry. Nick actually has worked a lot with Cranberry, so the more parks that we are able to set this monitoring equipment up in, the more we will find them. So it's not to say that these bats don't exist in other parks. This is just where we've been able to set up our equipment and get good data from thus far. So kind of cool, right? You get to see who's where. I was very excited to see that Ward has Easterns because I think that they're neat bats. Okay. All right, so just a quick status recap. As in their IUCN status. So the little browns and the eastern small-footeds are endangered. Womp womp. Tricolors are vulnerable. Indianas and northerns are near threatened. And so all of these are bad categories to be in. And most of this is because of white nose syndrome. And then a little bit is because of habitat loss. So bummer. And then down here with least concern, we've got big browns, hories, silvers, and eastern reds. So over half of New York's bat species are not in good shape. So there's stuff that we can do to help them. We'll talk about that in a second. But what are the main things that are causing bats to decline? Like we've talked about, white nose. A little bit with the unregulated wind turbines, so that's not a huge issue. Pesticide use, also not so great for them. So if you look over here, we have to remember that globally, bats eat fruits and nectars, so they're exposed to plants. And also insectivorous bats eat the insects that may have been exposed to pesticides. So through biomagnification, they actually can eat a lot of pesticide if they eat a lot of bugs, which our New York bat species do. So pesticide use, not great for these guys. It can cause death, reproductive issues, and neurological issues. Bump, bump. And then another one is habitat loss. So this is actually Salt Lake City, but this shouldn't be a terribly unfamiliar site, right? It's dense suburbs. You don't see a lot of the habitat that they need. So this, for example, is a perfect bat habitat. That's a snag, bat talk for dead tree. And that's where moms, look at this little mom eastern red. She's got 3 pups, 1, 2, 3, and they're all nursing and adorable. But when a bat comes out of hibernation or returns back to New York for breeding season, they need somewhere warm. Bats can't raise their babies in caves. And anyone that has been around a newborn, anyone that's been around a newborn knows you don't put it in the fridge, right? which sounds horrible, but go with me on this. Bats don't have their babies in caves because caves are typically cold. Now, they're not cold enough to freeze an adult bat with its big fluffy fur, but look at these poor little naked babies. So bats do need alternate sites to have their maternity colonies in the spring and summer. And typically those have to be very warm places, like bat boxes. So what can we do to help with each of these issues? Look at that sad bat. So with white nose syndrome, a big thing can be, number one, stay out of bat caves. There are actually a lot of bat caves that used to be tourist sites that are now restricted. So if you come across a cave that has closed down to hiking, respect that. It can be crappy as a hiker, and I've definitely experienced this, to be restricted from going into a cave you wanted to explore, but you could be the next person to bring spores into a cave and decimate the bats. So if you see signage, stay out of a bat cave. Otherwise, between cave hikes, wash your gear. You wouldn't be able to tell, but your boots could be carrying enough spores to kill a whole population. All right. Lobby for remediation efforts for wind turbines. Again, wind energy is great, but we just need to tweak it a little so we don't kill a bunch of bats. Pesticide use, be thoughtful if you're using residential pesticides. Try to check your labels, try to analyze that you have to use as much as you're using, stuff like that. Anything you do to the bugs, you do to the bats. And then in terms of the global scale, consider organic produce or companies that have policies against using the more intense pesticides that lead to bat death. And then most pressingly for our area, you can actually do a lot for habitat loss. If you can leave portions of your property with some standing dead trees that aren't a danger, if you can support local preserves like Teatown, which offers a lot of habitat, or if you can even install a bat box at your home. So let's talk about bat boxes for a second. What the heck is a bat house or a bat box? A bat box is basically a birdhouse for bats. So I have one here. Ta-da! This is a bat house. Not a big deal. This could actually fit nearly 100 bats. This is a single chamber, so I'm exaggerating. But if you get a 3-chambered, which is only slightly larger, like this, they can fit an entire maternity colony, which could really substantially help bats. And I just inhaled sawdust from the bat house. Sorry. Whew. Don't inhale your bat house. If you do decide to install a bat house, yay, there's tons of resources online, including on my website, which I will give you at the end of this. But the biggest things, they need to be high up, like pretty high up. 10 is the bare minimum, closer to 20 is better. That's because of predators. Also because bats, when they leave a bat house, they need a drop zone because that gives them the momentum that they need. Whoosh. Bats actually have a really hard time taking off straight from the ground. So they need that big clear drop zone below the bat house entrance, because the entrance is on the bottom. Okay. And that enables them to start flying successfully. They should be southeast facing, and that's because it'll give them extra sunlight, which keeps the bat house warm. Because remember, you don't put babies in the fridge, right? You paint them dark for the same reason. Keeps them warmer. Bats like it warm. No babies in the fridge. And then if you can, mounting them on trees is okay, but it does actually leave the bat house vulnerable to, you can't see it in this picture, but because it's the fall, but if you picture when all the foliage comes in, if you tree mount a bat house, typically it gets shaded out too much. Also predators, raccoons and snakes especially love climbing trees and then just basically reaching up into bat houses for snacks. So poles and buildings are great. If you have like a garage or a shed that's really tall, any of those would be awesome opportunities to put up a bat house if you don't want one on your house. Okay. And then again, there's a lot of other little things you can do to help out the bats in terms of the way that you mount your bat box, but cross that bridge when you get to it. All right. So in terms of time, I did leave us a lot of time for you guys to do the after quiz and ask questions. So let's have at it. Let's see, I've got the chat over here. This is the QR code for the after quiz. So if you feel like you've learned anything, or if you wouldn't mind just helping me collect data for grad school, please take the after quiz. All right, let me look in the chat. Oh, by the way, when you take the quiz,
As you walk
see,
along,
a
head
link
over
to my website. All right. Okay, got the chat open over here.
All right. So, hi, Wendy. I've got a
Hi.
couple questions for you. So, we want to know what your favorite bat species is.
Oh, that's such a good question. So I'm really torn. My favorite New York bat species, I struggle between the Eastern Reds because they're just so fluffy, and the big browns. I think the big browns are just, I don't know, they feel like a big dog to me. So those are my two favorite New York species. Hoary is a close second because they're so fluffy, and I very maturely giggle every time I say their name. It refers to their frost-like fur color. Thank you. But in terms of international bats, I would either have to go with the Indiana flying fox, which is one of these, or the Indian flying fox, or the white tent making bat.
Very nice. We have a question. What is being done to keep hikers out of caves, specifically in New York State?
So in New York State, there aren't as many regulated caves. But again, it's just a matter of, like, for example, in Indiana, several caves have had this done to them. They literally fence them off. So if it's been an identified area where there are Indiana bats, for example, those sites are roped off. But now that the little brown bat is endangered, that's a pretty new classification for them. So there's a lot of work being done now to see if there are sites worth chaining off basically here as well.
Great. Hopefully those measures will help here.
Even if it
we
doesn't
have-
get to the regulation level, as hikers, what you can do again is just take it into your own hands and like wash your stuff basically. But I know that's, if you're conscientious, you are in the minority in terms of people in nature, unfortunately. So
sadly, with not just with bats, species in general, right? We have another question. Is there any relationship between the type of bat, cave versus tree, and likelihood that they are going to get into your house? And what do we know about why bats like to come inside?
Oh, that's a great question. So why they like to come inside just has to do with availability of habitat. So bats don't like being around noise and light when they have the chance, except when they're hunting. They like dark, quiet homes. Homes for them, meaning like dead trees or live trees with leaf clusters. But if they can't find anything like that in their area, then they will search out a warm place to have their pups that's quiet and calm. So that's why attics can be good for them. There is a lot of data about which specific species are. I'm just looking through right now. I don't have it memorized which ones tend to, outside of the little browns, which ones tend to be like house seekers. Let's see. I do have my chart. Can you guys see this? Did I effectively drag that into your pane of view?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, there's a lot of resources out there. It's kind of just a matter of picking up a manual and picking through like which one would I most likely find in my house. But the shortest answer is the little browns used to be kind of the species that was most tolerant of, oh, that's my computer. Buildings, but some other ones include, you'll get your eastern smallfoot sometimes, but they prefer rock crevices. Let's see, just poke through my own notes here. Yep, your northerns will go into buildings. So it just depends, you kind of poke through the different species, but there are certainly like the hoary bats and the red bats, for example, do not prefer buildings. They're much more solitary. So they'll be the ones to kind of stick more towards the woods.
Okay, great. Why do bats mate prior to hibernation?
Fabulous question. It probably just has to do with availability. When you've got the energy available to you to spend a little bit longer finding a mate and tangoing, you do. Whereas in the spring, bats are coming out of hibernation, so their energy stores are a little bit depleted. So if you have to spend that extra effort finding a mate, it probably evolved that that's less likely where you'll be successful. That's
And
conjecture, but that's
yeah, just a footnote on that. Many species that do hibernate, other animal species also will mate prior to hibernation. A lot of reptiles and amphibians who are autumnal breeders will do that, and insects as well. So it's very cross species.
spiders love that game.
Oh, yes, definitely. We have another question. I've heard mixed things about whether putting up bat boxes really work, as in bats actually will use them. Can you please address?
Yes, absolutely. So the majority of bat house failures just have to do with human failures, which sounds harsh, but and a lot of the research is new, figuring out what makes a bat house work. But a lot of the times you'll get the perfect bat house and you'll paint it the perfect color and you'll put it up really high, but you won't monitor the temperature, and it's a temperature that's slightly colder than they need it. That's the biggest issue. And a lot of people also put them in areas that are either too light or sound polluted. The other thing that can be an issue, typically if you're within about a quarter mile of a water source, that's going to make food availability and water availability easier for bats. So if you're nowhere near water or a really hardy insect population, that could be a deterrent. But sometimes it is just a matter of, did bats find your bat house? Sometimes even the perfectly placed bat house takes 2 or 3 seasons to be found. Unlike my air conditioner, which you would think would be imperfect, but actually it's on a southeast facing wall that gets 6 to 8 hours of sun. So I understand where that bat was going. But yeah, typically it's just poor installation.
Great, thank you. Can we buy commercial bat houses somewhere?
Yes, yes, you can. And if you go to my website, which is again linked in the after part of that quiz, you can get there. Otherwise, unfortunately, I have not paid for this bat site yet, so that's a very confusing URL. Otherwise, BatCon and Merlin Tuttle both will sell bat houses, and BatCon and Merlin Tuttle, these two right here, sorry, these are massive, massive bat conservation groups. And they've done a ton of research. Actually, I have a book by Merlin Tuttle right here, one of my favorites. So these are 2 really reliable sources for very well-made bat houses. I would be wary of buying bat houses on, for example, Etsy, because a lot of the times the materials that are used are not safe. And a lot of the times the dimensions aren't quite right. A lot of people build them too broad. So if it's shaped like a bat or a bird house, it's not a good bat house. It should be skinny, because bats like to squeeze into tight spaces, almost like they're pretending to snuggle under the bark of a tree.
Wendy, we had a request if we could get those links up in the chat.
Yeah, you can. I actually meant to do that and totally forgot. So whoever just put that reminder in there, you're the best. Boom, have at it.
Okay, great, thank you. We have another question. If you mount a bat house on your house, how do you discourage bats from moving into the house?
The bat house itself will do that, actually. So this is one of the, so it's called exclusion. When you have bats that made their way into your attic, for example, you would need to do. So typically what you want to do is wait until after the bats have left for the season. Unfortunately, you know, if you notice a bat and then you exclude it, you could be unintentionally isolating it from its baby. Or if it, you know, has a very young bat that's just learning to fly, you could be leaving it homeless and you could kill a bunch of bats. But so typically exclusion will include putting some kind of like wire grate or mesh that bats can't get through. And then if you put a bat house next to it, they'll go into their house and be like, oh crap, and they'll kind of sneak into their bat house. So just making sure that if you have things like gables or other entrances into your home, you put some kind of screen above them and then you're good to go.
Great information, thank you. What types of measures can be done to reduce bat mortality due to wind turbines?
Just in general? Or did you cut out for a second? Oh, in general?
In general, yes.
These measures. So these 4 categories of things would be great places to start. So helping them address habitat loss, susceptibility to white nose, pesticide toxicity, and then less so, but again, if you have some time on your hands, you want to write a letter about wind turbines, those would be the 4 things.
Okay, great. We have another one. Is
Ooh.
it pointless to mount a
one more
bat
in
house? Go ahead.
One more thing I'll add in there, and I should have put this on my list, is just talk to people about bats and, you know, kind of help demystify them and tell people what you know about helping bats. So spread the word is something else you can do. Okay, sorry, go on.
That's okay. I think spreading the word and awareness is important for a lot of animals, especially the misunderstood. So definitely. Is it pointless to mount a bat house on a tree given that they're more susceptible to predators?
No, it's not pointless. It's not pointless, but you really want to make sure that you get it as high up as possible, with as much clearance above it as possible. So, especially if it's a very, very big trunked tree where a snake, for example, wouldn't be able to climb up it. But then if it's too big, you got your raccoons. So no, it's not pointless. If it's a really good tree and if it's your only option, because worst come to worst, predators don't typically take out entire colonies. They'll just have a hearty snack and somebody still might survive that otherwise wouldn't have.
That was a good question. Will bats partake in the Cicada Fest or Feast of 2021?
Oh, yes. So I have not researched which New York bat species like cicadas, but oh, who's the beetle lover? Is it my big browns? I think my big browns might be. I know cicadas aren't beetles, but just in terms of sizing, because most of these bat species love moths. Moths are super nutritious. Well, I can't remember off the top of my head. I would have to look back at my notes, but yeah, short answer is bats will be snacking for sure.
I'm looking forward to the Cicada Fest of 2021. I won't feast on them, but definitely excited that they're coming out, and I love cicadas. We have another question. National Bat Appreciation Day is April 17th. Any plans?
Well, none yet, other than feverishly posting on my Instagram, and Nick and I will probably go out and check on our monitoring equipment. So I guess those count as plans. Maybe I'll like sing to my dead bats. Right, guys? It's party time. Yeah. I won't really do that, I promise. But yeah, checking the monitoring equipment. Let's go with that answer.
All right, sounds great. If no one else has any other questions, thank you so much, Wendy. This has been amazing. And we do have a recording of this, so that will go out to all ticket holders after this is done. And Wendy will send you a copy as well. So thank you so much. Oh, I love that video. I could watch that all day. Bats are definitely amazing and one of those underappreciated animals. So thank you everyone for joining us. And again, the next presentation will be on vernal pools, and we'll be talking about mostly amphibians, but why they're ecologically important and all the other good creatures that live in there. So thank you everyone. And thank you for working with us through our technology issues. Wendy, it's been a pleasure. Very informative. Loved it.
Thank you so much, and thank you to Tea Time and my friends and family that are hopping over right here. I'm taking a quick screenshot of you guys. This is adorable. So thank you so much, everybody. I'll text about half of you right now. Bye, guys.
Have a great night, everyone.